gosh. Okay, yes. Oh, yeah. Okay, they changed the sharing. Copy link on Twitter. There we go. Hey, M. Lizzle. Hello, Senior Bob. Great to be back. Yeah, check out the raccoons. Alright, got everything in order. Got my lights, camera, action. So yeah, just got back from Shucks. We did me, Ross, Connell, Paula Deming, and Philippa War, aka Pip, did a role-playing game with the Battle Gumshoe system live on stage, but instead of playing, usually it's a Nancy Drew mystery type thing where you play as teenagers, but we played as raccoons, and it was super great for the system because we were in the school for talented raccoons, and we played, one person was the yearbook photographer, one person was the jock, and I was the raccoon who was just painfully aware that we're all actually raccoons. So I got to steal some stuff. I was very proud of my tail, always like licking it and fluffing it. Like, we ringtails, very proud of our tails. So it was fun and silly, and hopefully they'll post the video of that soon, because I'd love to be able to share that. Game Pal just says, best part of the 7 p.m. stream, forces you to clock out of work at a reasonable hour. Yes. It's good to take a break. Like those Canadian raccoons that save Christmas. I don't know what that means. Canadian raccoons that save Christmas. Is that a movie or something? The Christmas Raccoons. The Christmas Raccoons is the first of 4 raccoon specials. It was the #1 U.S. syndicated animated special in 1980 and was aired only in Canada and the United States. Oh my gosh. The Christmas Raccoon. Oh my... Alright, I'm watching the video of this now. Wow, this is very, very 80s and kind of creepy. Yes. Yeah, pretty much almost exactly like that. Alright, so now, so we drove back from Canada yesterday. I also started teaching strategy games class to 2nd through 5th graders at a school once a week, which I did yesterday as well, which is exciting and terrifying. Kids love games and are really good at picking them up. They're very comfortable with just doing the stuff of the game, whereas adults can be a lot more wrapped up in, I think I've talked about this before, but in doing it right and why you do certain things. Kids just do the stuff of the game, they really get into it, so that's been really fun, but it's been busy. I need to come down from all of that and get into game design mode. Also, we talked, remember last week we did the stream about customs, because we were talking about me going through customs with my game, all the things that we had to get together to make it through that, and then it ended up being fine. It was like nothing to get through, mostly because I had so few games and I was making so little money on them that they're just like, yeah, it's cool, don't worry about it. So that was nice. Good to know for the future. It's good to be prepared, but also, at least in my case, was less stressful than expected. Michigan's most popular raccoons right now. Are they paper towel roll? No one knows more about recycling in Michigan than us raccoons. Brought to you by the Michigan Department of Environment. Oh my gosh. This is probably one of the best things that's ever happened before. They're so adorable. Oh my gosh, recycling raccoons. Yes, raccoons. And this little got a little cardboard bow tie. This one has glasses. Oh my gosh. These things are literally the cutest. I love this. Gladys Glass. Oh my gosh, I get it. They're like recycling different materials, I think. And this one's got a mohawk. Oh my gosh, that is literally the best. It's pretty awesome, actually. Adults are all, I need to understand the big picture and build a strategy before I do anything. Kids are all, what can I do? Let's go. It's true, and funnily enough, often the what can I do attitude makes you better at the games, because adults get wrapped up in the planning and the strategy of it. They overthink a lot of the times. I think that's a big part of it. And once you get into overthinking mode, I'm gonna say double think. Every decision, you are unsure about it, and that feeling of uncertainty kind of clouds your judgment. Double guess, that's the word I was looking for. You're double guessing every decision, and you start to get a lot of weight and pressure built up on these things, where the best way to learn a game is to do the stuff of the game and start to see how all the pieces come together. And you can do that better if you just play the game, it turns out. For a lot of games. There's definitely more complex games, especially certain Euro games, where you can, if you make a mistake early on in the game, you can kind of screw yourself over for the rest of the game. You still learn from that, so I don't think it's the worst, but adults definitely have this very, a lot of intense emotions wrapped up in failing and making mistakes, which you do learn best if you fail and make mistakes. Failing is good. Making mistakes is good. So that's why I love the way that kids play games. And if you're playing a lot of games, playing new games, I suggest just letting go. And it's something I've had to work on a lot too, because I'm very competitive. I do care about winning. I don't know why. It just doesn't matter, right? I don't like a game better if I win, for the most part. Sometimes I'm like, oh, the game was great, I won. But for the most part, it's separating out those feelings. I feel good about a game when I understood the stuff of it, and I had a plan I was executing on. The actions in the game rewarded me for doing the things that the game wanted me to do. So it's like, I think it wants me to build this thing, and then I built the thing, and it rewarded me and gave very strong feedback for the actions I was taking. And that was very satisfying. So I've worked, especially with bigger and more complex games, just start doing it. Play a card, buy a thing, move your piece around on the board, and you'll figure it out. Gameball just says, it feels like kids' approach to learning playing games is a lot more likely to hit that feeling of flow than the deep analysis and angst that adults bring to strategy building, decision making. The angst. There's a lot of overthinking that goes into a lot of our decisions as adults in playing game. Like, look at what are some of the games that I've been playing with the kids. Sushi Roll. I think that was one that I played with the games. That's a game that would work pretty well with kids. But I was playing that with a bunch of my friends, with a bunch of adults, and one of the most interesting things I see with these games is, especially a lighter game like that, you're trying to play it fast, you're trying to teach it quickly, just get people doing the actions, and then it gets to someone's turn, or it goes one round. In Sushi Roll, you re-roll the dice every turn, so everyone takes their dice, pass the dice on the conveyor belts, and then you re-roll the dice. And one of my friends looked at it and was like, oh, I don't get to, these dice are re-rolled. I'm not planning out several moves ahead. I'm like, yeah, there's just, the point of this is you can see which dice are available because each one has a different distribution. You have that laid out on your board, but you don't know exactly the faces you're going to get. So several people were looking at it and trying to plan out a strategy based on these faces. And seeing the reroll, there's a moment of, oh shoot, I had this whole plan that I was putting in place based on this system. Then it turned out that I was wrong with my assessment. And for kids, I think part of it is they don't build up this whole strategy and simulation, I think, in their brains. And the second part of it is, to the extent that they do build up this simulation, they're much more adept at pivoting from that simulation. You know, building a new picture in their minds, like, oh, this is what it looks like. They're just more adaptable, right? Kids are just used to learning and things changing around them. And adults can be much more rigid in their thinking. So if you pull that back to game design, there are learnings that we can have as game designers here. If you're designing games for kids and families, which I think is an awesome thing to do, it's a huge market, and I say it's underserved. There's a lot of games that come out for kids and families, but I think there is a unique space for things that are a little more strategic, that let people make more interesting choices. A lot of the games in the kids' family market are simpler, more focused. There's still a lot of roll and move games out there, things that are a little more toy-like, and you're not making as many interesting decisions. But you can make games that are good for kids by having simplicity, having it really easy for them to make the decision and make the consequences of the decision really easy to understand. And even if you're designing a game for adults and you want to get over this barrier, the more granular you can make the things and the better feedback you can get for every decision that they're making. Instead of play a series of things on my turn and then it all scrambles together and then there's an outcome. Especially in the beginning of the game, have small actions and immediately you can see the consequences, and then the consequences for success or failure are lower and it's easier to get that feedback loop going. It's really satisfying for games. Email just says, adults have much more sophisticated and just have gameologists say all this stuff, because from a more academic perspective, a lot of this stuff you say is very smart. Much more sophisticated and tested mental models. So that's what I was saying, the picture of the plan of the moves that they're going to make during the course of the game. So they tend to fall back on those to develop strategies and avoid known failure states, right? As much as we say, you learn through failure, you learn from making mistakes. It's hard to get that through to adults, me included. This is a personal experience, something I'm very aware of, and something that I'm working on fixing. Kids are still building the mental models, so they're very much in experimentation mode to see where failure states occur. All right, so we're partway into the stream here. I think I'm ready to start our mind map, because we're going to design a game here. Love talking about the games, my experiences, and also making new games. I don't think I had a suggestion online, although I did see this really cool game jam pop up. It was Nicole Jekic on Twitter who surfaced this for me, and as much as I have a million different games that I'm working on, this game jam really caught my eye. So much so that I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to throw aside everything that I'm working on and just do this one, because it seems very much up my alley. It's funny. She even said, this game jam is right up my alley. Let me copy the link to this tweet. So this is Our Little Food Jam. Tabletop games. So this is for small, light role-playing games. about memories, recipes, and good taste. So here's the link if you want to check out the details of the game jam. Which I want to check out. So what's cool about game jam for a smaller, lighter tabletop role-playing game is I think it's a little easier and faster. There's a lot of stuff that you can lean on, a lot of known quantities. What I've been learning from working on a lot of card games and board games is even if you think you have a really simple, elegant system, there can just be so much testing and iterations, and you think you have it, and then everything falls apart and you have to go back to the drawing board, which is fine. You know, I'm very dedicated and committed to making these kinds of games, and I know eventually everything will come together, but it can take time to really make the pieces work. And for something like this food game jam, tabletop role-playing game, there's 18 days. That's all the time you have to submit something to this game jam. So you don't have time to make a really elegant, heavily tested system. It's more about making something that's maybe a little rough around the edges, something hearty, something spiritually satisfying. Spiritually satisfying. Another thing I love about this jam is they actually broke down the parts of it and explained exactly the kind of thing that they were looking for. So our little food, it's not just a role-playing games about food jam. Our little food game jam. I'm going to put the link in here as well so I don't lose that. They broke it down piece by piece, first with the hour, right? What they're looking for here is personal experiences with food. So whether that's cultural, something you grew up eating or making or serving or sharing with your family or community group, something you just have a personal history with, something you made the recipe for the first time, you have really good memories about it, and continue to make it after that point. I think the important thing is here, it doesn't have to be cultural, or it doesn't have to be I think with the food traditions, a lot of people, I'm a first generation American, both my parents came from Europe, so I do have quote unquote cultural food experiences that I got from my parents. But there's a lot of people who don't have that same food history, who might look at their family and say like, oh, we didn't really, we don't have a cool anything that's like really different or interesting cuisines. We just made like a green bean casserole or a grilled cheese, a special grilled cheese sandwich or a special type of chili or something. I think it's important for looking at this, like we all have culture. We all have a food culture. And I think we get so close to it sometimes that we don't realize how cool other people would think that this food or this recipe or the environment in which it came together. It could be something like cooking hot dogs around the campfire on a yearly camping trip with your family. It also doesn't have to be with your family of blood. I think sometimes, a lot of the times, people can have difficult relationships with their blood family. But in that case, a lot of the times you've built up a family of friends, your community of choice, as opposed to your community of birth. So no matter who you are, there's a good chance that you have something. Like look to your history with food, and I'm sure that there's something fascinating that you can play around with there. And now little food. This part of it, I think, was really cool as well because, first of all, I love bites, appetizers, snacks, say apps. I think that that's a really cool way to focus this as well. And not that, if it was a big banquet or a feast or something, I'm sure that the guidelines of this are pretty flexible. It's meant to be, like with our stream, more of an inspiration than a limitation on your creativity. But the more you can constrain a design jam or the frame of game ideas, the more interesting stuff you can come up with. And then it's a jam, right? It's got 18 days for you to make the thing, post it on Itch. And another cool thing, if you look at the page, is the designers are encouraged to put it up on Itch for purchase for at least $3. And I love that they're also reminding designers that the stuff they are making has value, and we put so much effort into the things that we create, and we give so much away for free that in the end a lot of us can't support ourselves for what we're doing. So a lot of cool things going on here, and yeah, we're creating stuff based on this idea. A jam game for game jam. Gosh, in your bob. Jam. I think jam would fall under the category of little food. Jam is definitely a tradition in my family. We've almost always had fruit trees or gardens or berries growing. My grandparents in Norway actually used to have a strawberry farm. They only had it when I was very young, and I have distant memories of what that was like. But it was cool. Strawberries are my favorite fruit, probably because of those memories that I have from that time. So jam. Making jam is fun. It's very tasty. Not too complicated. Email just says, one of my more recent fun food discoveries and the weird backstory for how it got into my life. It was a tech-mediated cultural share. Interesting. Frog eye salad. Is it savory, sweet, a salad, a pudding? We may never understand. Are there pictures of this? Frog. Okay, you see this? I think you need to do this game jam because, oh my gosh, what is even happening here? Sweet pasta salad made with small round acini di pepe pasta, whipped topping, and egg yolks. And there's fruit in it. This looks like, was it Fantasia? Ambrosia. That's the weird Americana, what is it, like yogurt or whipped topping or jello, all sorts of things mixed together. I didn't know this was a thing, and this is like a perfect example of an our little food jam sort of a thing. And there's a lot of different things you could lean into with this. The discovery journey of trying a new recipe. So I want to talk about this one a little bit because we're talking about history and culture, the kinds of things that we grew up with. I'm thinking about food traditions and how it's interesting how we carry on certain things. We have very strong sensual memories of the foods that we grew up with because memories formed when you were younger tend to be very powerful. And memories formed based on taste and smell and multiple senses tend to be stronger than memories formed around one or two senses. So, and with food, you have everything, right? You have sight, smell, taste, texture. So you got the feeling in there, and even sound, what the food sounds like to eat, what it sounds like to make, the conversations that you had around making these foods. But I think it's very interesting when you try a new recipe, or when you rediscover, I'm going to write that down as well, rediscover a recipe from your childhood that you consumed but never made, and maybe something that you had long ago in the past, and then you make it, you're like, oh, I don't exactly like it this way, and so it evolves, like the cultural evolution of recipes over time. So we have a lot of really interesting stuff here. Trying new recipes, and they work their way into your community ecosystem. I love the evolution idea here, where you have, like, to keep it simple, great grandma's chocolate chip cookie recipe. I don't know about you, but every time I make a recipe, it's like, wow, this is so good. This is one of my favorite things. I'm going to tweak it. I'm going to change it a little bit. Like, what if I mix it up like this? Just because I love the science of it and the playfulness of it, and you're like, so it's really good now, but what if it could be even better? And what you get here is all of the offspring have the original recipe. Different people evolve it in different ways. Add some sugar, change butter for shortening, different types of chocolate, different cooking times, different sizes or quantities. For a chocolate chip cookie, different add-ins. And then you have the recipes trickling down the family tree. Till each branch of the tree has a very different recipe that they are very attached to. Lingonberries. Yes, lingonberries. Lingonberries are very tasty. I like the IKEA has a lingonberry juice. I really enjoy. Local lunatics brainstorming around communal food. Nice. Ooh, yeah. Code enforcement, lasagna, hootenanny. Oh my gosh, that's Lansing Public Schools. Okay, Lansing Public Schools tofu kerfluffle. I think that might be my favorite one so far. Schools tofu. So for the cultural evolution of recipes over time, we have the family version. I think I'll add this to this. And then the community version. More competitive, question mark? Because in the family version, like, you're all kind of making your recipes, bring it to family reunions. I guess I could be competitive as well. But I'm thinking more of the community version, bake sales and cook-offs. You have your regional or community food of choice. And the recipes spread and evolve that way. One of the interesting things about potlucks is they feel very familiar, whether they're with people you know well or not, and they're mostly a judgment-free zone in terms of picky eating. You trust the food will be good even if you don't recognize it, because someone there made it. Eating the same food for the first time in a restaurant wouldn't have the same feeling of safety and trust. Safety, trust, comfort. And this is actually, if you haven't gotten a chance to listen to our Ludology podcast that we did with Jen Sandercock, definitely check that out, because we talked a lot about her edible games, which are actually games that are played with the mechanic of eating, and how much is wrapped up around trust, comfort, safety, all these feelings. Like, food is such an integral part of living and humanity, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes into our feelings around food. And I do like that and really appreciate that. Because this is making me think in a slightly different direction. Joining a new region, community, family. I want to come up with a generic term for shared food event. Community supper for the first time. So there's two things, right? There's growing up in this environment, and you kind of get used to the things you like, the things you don't like. But it is fascinating, like you mentioned, game biologist, the coming into one of these things for the first time, and it's an exercise in trust, especially if it's a area or region you're less familiar with. Type of regional or culture food. Being brave and trying new foods. Getting to know a new community based on the foods they share with each other. Yeah, and I don't know if that's an adaptation, if that's if there's some psychological stuff going on when you join a new community and you're part of a food sharing event, if you're psychologically inclined enjoy the food more because this is the way that we bond. Are some people more inclined to enjoy these types of experiences more than others? Some people are picky around food. I don't want to say some people are picky. Like, I think I want to say, are there circumstances in which some people don't connect through food in this way? Does our enjoyment of the food relate to our connectedness to the people? is enjoying the food a way to connect? Even if we're shy or uncomfortable. I know I had this situation growing up. My family moved around a lot, so I would often find myself in a situation of being in a new place or a new community with these people who'd lived there their entire lives. And it's kind of like the person who hovers around the snack table, right? Even if you are having trouble connecting with people or feeling comfortable in a new space, at least you can rely on enjoying the food. You can start conversations around the food. This is a trick that took me a long time to learn. But now, if you're a shyer person or have trouble making conversations and you're trying to work through that or get better at that, just talking about most of the places where people gather have food, and just talking about that is like, oh, did you try the prosciutto rolls? They're really tasty. Or asking questions. What's your favorite food here? Do you have anything that you suggest? Or, do you know who made so-and-so? Or which thing did you bring? There's so much conversation that we can have around shared food. Ooh, I like that one, Game Biologist. What are the ecological pressures, ecological in quotes, that push recipes to mutate and speciate? Man, such fancy language. I like that. Allergens, local ingredient availability, new family tastes from intermarriage, etc. Yeah, and this is tying back to what we were saying up here about cultural evolution of recipes over time. You have multiple forces at work here, right? You have allergens, and this is, I think, a pretty modern thing, especially with new diets and different considerations, people being allergic to nuts, people having gluten sensitivities, people being vegan or vegetarian, just wanting to incorporate certain healthy options. Yeah. Testing recipes to make them more widely accessible while still being tasty. There's a lot of different things that you can do and play around with for making things healthy or avoiding a lot of these allergens without necessarily turning it into something inedible, which can be an interesting task. There's a lot of cool stuff you can play around with in that space. Oral to written traditions, routine. So I would say, especially in even recent generations, a lot of recipes were passed down through oral tradition. A lot of my mom's recipe is like bread recipe. she doesn't have it written down, right? She'll write down the recipe for me, but it's like when you translate a oral recipe to written recipe, you lose some things. Because a lot of time in a written recipe, you'll want to have exact measurements, right? But in oral isn't even necessarily, it's like it's stored in your brain as opposed to on a piece of paper, right? You'll often have instructions like add water until the recipe becomes like glue, right? A glue-like consistency. And you know from your practice and years of experience exactly what that's supposed to be like, but communicating that, even showing someone that, can be tricky. And a lot of these are things you have to play around with in order to get them to work out. Personal preferences. So like I tend to like things that aren't too sweet. I love sugars and pastries and baked goods, but I've noticed as I get older, I'm not necessarily looking for just like high sugar content in things. I usually reduce the sugar in recipes. I like strong, interesting, weird, surprising flavors. So I'll add coriander or ground ginger or cardamom to different things to just get that, not so much that it's like, oh wow, cardamom. It's like, wow, this is, it's got a depth to it. Also soy sauce or fish sauce for umami. That kind of thing. Local ingredients. Especially when the recipe is transplanted from one region to another. Every area has access to different types of ingredients or different names for the same ingredient. Like I have some recipes from a British cookbook and they have castor sugar, which I still don't remember exactly what it is. I think it's like a finer grind of sugar. Different types or grinds of flour. Corn salt, which is like a ammonia salt, I think. It is used in Norwegian cooking as a leavening agent, I think. It is very distinctive and very powerful, and kind of stinky. But if it's something that you grew up with, you have a certain nostalgia for it. Kambada says, food gives you something to do with your hands and eyes, so much more comfortable than a bare room full of strangers. And if nothing else, you can say, do you know who made this? I really like it. It's a conversation starter. Keep mixing in water until the dough feels right. I know, that's such a common thing. Like, you'll just know. Because if there's a recipe you've made over and over again, you'll just know when it's ready. Senior Bob says, during World War II, a lot of Jewish folks fled to South America. A new generation of recipes came out of blending Jewish and South American cuisine. Yeah. I guess making do with ingredients in a new place that aren't exactly the same. Yeah, I love this idea of the evolutionary tree of say cuisine genetics. All right. Journey, rediscover, evolution. As part of this tree, so you have your own, each person has their own genetic food tree. We'll call it for now. Probably a better name for that. And then getting in new recipes over time. Trying something new, cross-pollination from other people's trees. I say inserts, new things inserted from the accessibility of recipes on the internet and especially YouTube. New types of cuisines in restaurants, and then you try them at home. Here's one that I've been doing recently. You have something that you make from a mix that now you try making from scratch, and it's better than expected. I had a fun experience with this recently. Brownies, right? So brownies and cakes, specifically yellow cakes, traditional birthday cake, always made from scratch, or start over, always made from boxes because it's super easy and they turn out really well. I recently looked up a brownie recipe because I really wanted brownies and I had all the ingredients, but I hadn't bought a mix. I'm like, oh, I want brownies, and it's too late to get a box mix of brownies. Made the brownies, much butter, is it butter, eggs, a lot of cocoa. It was like as much cocoa as flour, just tons of cocoa in there with chocolate chips in it, which I always like having those little bits of chocolate sprinkled throughout it. And it was really good. It was not that complicated to make, and it was just very, very tasty. So sometimes you'd always made things one way, and you have innovation to make it 10 times better. Also, sometimes you have a food that you've made before. It was okay. Didn't really turn out great. And then you have a recipe, you find a recipe or a suggestion that makes it 10 times better. I used to be like I don't really like, what's a good example? I don't know. I like most types of foods. I don't really like green bean casserole or something. And you make it a different way and realize how amazing it can be. A lot of times you might have grown up with the food culturally. Grown up with the food culturally and, you know, not really known how great it could be until you try something new, you know, like cooking vegetables or something were just never cooked quite right, and now you experience them. I'm going to check on something in the kitchen real quick. Give me 1 second, and we'll be right back. I had this candle lantern thing burning on the kitchen counter, and it made noise. I'm like, I'm going to blow that out because that seems... I don't like it when things on fire make noises. Oh, excuse me. Game biologist says, some of my favorite childhood dishes were ones that I only figured out later were products of the scarcity that my parents grew up with. The dessert treat I loved was Jell-O with milk and sugar. It was just a bowl with a couple of scoops of flavored Jell-O, roughly chopped with a spoon where you add enough milk to cover half the Jell-O and sprinkle a little sugar on top. It's basically poor people's food. Yeah, there's so many recipes. I think just looking up the history of food. Side note. Look up the history of foods. There's so many cuisines that come back to this, especially things that different rice and bean dishes. For a lot of Eastern cultures, you have rice and egg dishes. You might add some seasonings to it. You might add some vegetables that traditionally would have come to the from the garden, chilies, that kind of thing. The fancy dish, and then it can go the other way too. Something that was used to be incredibly fancy, but now the food becomes accessible. Alternatively, but then became cheap. So for my mom is from Norway, and for Christmas we almost always had, for Christmas Eve, which is when we open the presents because we're special and it's a lot better than opening them on Christmas Day. Get to open them early, which I always loved. Open them on Christmas Eve, and before that we would have risengrynsgrøt, which is a rice porridge that again is very simple. You basically put rice, ton of milk together, either cook it very carefully on the stove or cook it in a crock pot for a long time until the rice starts to break down. It's a rice porridge. I think rice is very cheap in a lot of places around the world. It's a staple in a lot of places around the world. But for the north of Norway, right, there would have been a certain time when rice came to Norway. I'm going to look that up actually. Rice in Norway. Do they have the history of that? Rice in Norway history. Ooh, got a little history here. Make a sidebar. Until the mid-1800s, the main porridge ingredient across Europe was barley, oats, and rye. Rice was an expensive and luxurious import commodity. In the 1300s, rice was imported to Norway and recognized as a status symbol. Serving rice porridge on Christmas Eve was something for the elite. There you go. That's a very fascinating tidbit. First in the 1800s, it became common among the working class. Since then, it has been a Nordic tradition and almost synonymous with the holidays. Yeah. Insert, this is a learning stream, right? We'll insert the history of rice porridge. So there's also a fascinating interplay there, right, with something that was very, a lot of the foods, I think, that are holiday traditions are things, think about sugar, right? Having cookies or treats or sweets around the holidays. For a lot of people, sugar was very expensive and hard to come by. I grew up, the annual Norway rice migration, was that in there, or is that just something, I don't know what that is, it's silly. Sugar, I grew up reading the Laura Ingalls Wilder's books, Little House on the Prairie, and it always really struck me about their holiday traditions. And a fruit like an orange, right, would be a very special thing. You'd get an orange once per year and you'd have to savor this thing, or a sugar candy that you would get. Like, just looking back on that and thinking about how you might eat sugar very rare. Like, you don't just have a pot of sugar on your counter. You just don't even think about it. Things like sugar and salt, right? That are now cheap, right? Cheap, we consider them to be basic ingredients, right? Incredibly rare and valuable. Email says, I found out recently that trends in meat is tied to ancillary livestock products. Mutton used to be common and cheap. It's become much less common, so lamb is now a luxury food. The trend was tied to wool production and resulting size of sheep flocks. Yeah, because wool used to be a lot more common, right? Before synthetic materials, wool used to be necessary in places, especially cold places. And now we don't use wool as much. So there's just sheep and livestock is a lot more rare. Lobster, right? The history of lobster is fascinating. How it used to be given to criminals, and there was a rule in prisons that you couldn't force them to eat lobster more than 3 times per week, which is bizarre, right? Now it's such a expensive luxury thing. All right. It's like, do I have a title here? The expenses of lobster. Potluck Shenanigans. Sounds like a band name. Half the time, the titles that we come up with for potential game name titles, it's like new game name title, or title of indie hipster band. Hipster band title. Who knows? So we've talked about food a lot. I love talking about food. I love food games. I love the evocativeness of food. The memories, the sensations. When I was in either 6th or 8th grade, I wrote a very piece based around the senses, and I'm pretty sure it was called A Winter Bake. Really tapped into the sound of the falling snow, the smells, the tastes, baking cookies on a winter day, and the different ways in which you can involve all of your senses into it. This is what you say when you want to be mocked about rice. Let me make it better. This is the rice in my house right now. It comes in both colors, white and brown. This is the least sophisticated rice ever. Minute rice. Yeah, but then again, the evolution. Like, minute rice is like par-cooked rice. And there's types of things that you can probably do with it that you wouldn't be able to do with other types of rice. So, say, ooh, here's a good one. Technology and innovation in ingredients and how that changes recipes and cooking traditions. I think a lot of times food innovations are seen, especially by foodies, right, as negative. Not real food, quote unquote. Those egg mixers, quick rice, boxes of brownie mix or cake mix, like a butter substitute, using oil instead of butter. But a lot of times, also, these ingredients are shelf stable. They last longer, they're cheaper a lot of the times, right? They're good if you can't go shopping regularly, if you need to travel to shop, if you're in a food desert. If you can't trust the freshness of your local grocery store. I think a lot of us are spoiled by having access to a lot of different grocery stores, high quality grocery stores where you go in there and you know that the ingredients that you have access to are going to be safe and healthy for your family. A lot of people don't have that same trust in the ingredients they have access to, which is an important consideration. And I believe game biologists said earlier that many of our favorite recipes come from lack and limitation. And it's important in these times when many people are hyper-focused, I would say, on whole foods, quote unquote, whole foods, health, getting back to our roots, paleo diet, right? And there's not necessarily a lot of science behind this, and there's a bit of elitism in some of these food styles. Wild rice. Wild. That rice is wild. Wild rice is massively culturally important to the tribes where it grows. Our tribes in Michigan are our best partners for the conservation and restoration of wild rice. It's a perfect merger of cultural and ecological value sets between people. You see, that's really cool. And again, we have here on the one side the elitism of getting back to our roots from a perceived health perspective. Perceived health perspective. We get it in our heads that quote unquote natural is better. People upcharge for these things because of the marketing. Because these things have good marketing campaigns, right? So there's a lot of different things that go into the reasons that we're digging into these more historical foods. So that's one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, you have culturally, people resurrecting and preserving and maintaining their they have powerful connections to their food traditions. Things that have been taken away from them. They have a cultural connection. That they're in danger of losing and that they want to preserve. And then there's a scientific perspective, right? And historic perspective. Scientific perspective, historic perspective, biodiversity. Maintaining these plants for scientific purposes and the health of the planet and people going into the future. Yeah, there's so much that goes into food and what we eat, making food, sharing food, growing food, raising food. It's really fascinating. All right. So we've talked a lot about food today. All the different things that go into history and culture and sharing food. So now I'm interested to see if we can tie it all together and move this in the direction of our little food game, role-playing game, or perhaps something you mechanize some of this. Like, first off, which of these things in particular we want to focus on, and then how we can mechanize it. I don't know if you see me being distracted here, but I have this cat who likes to stick his claws into my arm and I don't pay attention to him. And then I roll back to grab him and he's like, no, I'm sneaky. I'm running away. Alright, so we have, let me sketch stuff out here a little bit. Cookies. Cookie. Evolution tree. I don't know if I want to focus on the evolution of recipes, because that was something interesting we talked about earlier. The cultural mixing of cultures, melting pot, food melting pot. We have food melting pot, and then evolution of family recipes. people moving and getting new ingredients. So you have your chalk chip here, and maybe chalk chip with whole wheat flour. And here maybe raisins. Maybe it evolves and someone in the family doesn't like chocolate, so now it's raisins and nuts. Maybe this goes a couple, like someone leans into the flour thing. So chocolate chip with what other flours, like rice flour. And wheat, and completely no white flour. And this goes into like a gluten-free direction, so it's no wheat, almond, so like a flourless cookie, almond, hazelnut, what was the other one? Rye flour, maybe? I don't know if rye has gluten. I'd have to double check on that. Just nut flours. Evolution of family recipes. So if we make this into a game, start out with a food that has a bunch of ingredients. Each generation add, subtract, or modify an ingredient. Have a story that goes along with the new ingredient. And this comes back to the reasons for changing recipes we had mentioned above. So allergies, new cultural influence, moving to a new region, etc. And I always like to make games as accessible as possible. So this could be something, if you're really into recipes or cooking, you might know all the things that go into it. So maybe there are a few starter packs of recipes you can use with possible changes, with suggested, I'll say. Suggested changes for each generation, just making it a little bit easier. Like I have some sense of, I like to cook, but it'd be cool to have a game that was playable, whether or not everyone involved knew all about ingredients and recipes. So you're playing through generations of your family. And again, keep it in the small foods, little foods category that we're starting with for this game jam. Cookies, holiday snacks, appetizers, that kind of thing. And I like that too. Because I feel like there's less pressure on some of these little foods. Because there's the thing, the food, right? They're the foods we're super attached to. It must happen in a certain way that there can be an uproar if they change. Like the central dish, right? So focusing on the side foods could definitely help with keeping it, putting a little less pressure on keeping things the same. Play through generations of the family. So how do we get it into being more of a role-playing thing? Each recipe change comes with a role. We play as the person in the family who made the change, then the people they made the change for. Maybe it has to be someone else. So you're being empathetic. Sue is allergic to peanuts, so I need to change this recipe. Drawing a family tree of a recipe and telling the story of each new variation, why it came about, when where it was made, who it was shared with. The quiet year ends with a map of your story. This could be a lineage chart. Yeah, I like the lineage chart. We're thinking of a branching tree here, but maybe you're just following the one. Main branch. Maybe you have some interactions with different branches, or each player has their own branch, and that's how you make a tree together. So you have your own main branch, maybe there's sub branches that come off. Deck of cards with story prompts, decision points, special ingredients, so the players pick their own source dish. This is an interesting one. Yeah, because some ingredients make more sense for certain things. Maybe you have ingredient decks for a bunch of different types of food, like the cookie deck, the dumplings deck. I'd have to learn more about dumpling recipes. What are other like appetizer-y-ish? The rolls, bread deck, side dishes, the casserole, the ambrosia frog eye salad. Heck, I have to see if those things, do some research and see if those are connected. Role playing? Oh, I was thinking dice, but yeah, like roll with rolls being the food. Oh, man. As a sidebar, I realized I really like reading menus all the different ingredients that go into a dish. The ways in which they describe the dish. This is funny because I was actually thinking about a role-playing game a while back that was just all about going to restaurants and describing the foods that you're eating at these restaurants. And that was going to be the whole game for that game. It was like, going to a sushi restaurant, I'm going to order the spicy tuna roll. It's going to have like a nice kick to it, maybe some chopped up jalapenos in there, just like 3 hours of people talking about all the things that they're going to eat. I do like having it be a little guided like this. Include a lot of keywords you can use. Maybe your use sweet, savory, salty, crunchy, warm, with a sauce, herbal, musky, earthy, pungent, spicy, spiced, pitching / describing the dish to your family members. I brought my version of cookies to the potluck. They're warm and moist. Chocolate with chocolate chips. Maybe you're in teams, so you get to work together to describe the foods. If you draw the new ingredient card, let each player around the table give one ingredient chop style, and the active player picks which one to use. You have to level up to go to fancier hipsterer restaurants. I find the phrase flavor experience a little unsettling. So you gain experience points. Yeah, for this other game we're talking about, for going to the different restaurants. Yeah, Flavor Town. Get experience points so you level up your character, then you get access to the ritzy. You start out going to fast food restaurants, and that's all you can get into, and then you learn the secret knock and stuff to go to fancier restaurants and fancier ones until you're going to ones that are just a single word, like itch. Or food paradise. Yeah. I like chopped style too, where you have to, instead of choosing your recipes or modifications, change cooking technique. Maybe it's broiled instead of baked. You have them given to you. Maybe it's a blend. You pick one change, and then one change is given to you. to simulate the impact of outside forces. Cool, so we have some fun stuff here. For those of us who may just be joining us, for those of you who may just be joining us, we're talking about this Our Little Food Game Jam, which some people have been talking about on Twitter. It's a game jam on itch.io where they're looking for people to submit tabletop role-playing games, which you can put up on put up on itch and make available for purchase. And they're doing a jam for things related to our food, our cultural traditions of food, little food, so snacks and cookies and those kinds of things, as opposed to like big feasts. And then making it into a role-playing game where you can talk about and share your food experiences. So what we have so far is this idea that you start with your family food, someone makes a recipe for a cookie or that kind of thing, pass it on down to the family members. When it goes to the different branches of the family, it evolves in certain ways. I like this idea. What's interesting, I love talking about food. I love talking about ingredients. I want to find a way that we can talk about and share this experience without necessarily having to know about food or cooking. I think there's a lot of people who enjoy eating, but don't necessarily cook themselves with a level of experience where they could just, make food and ingredients up from scratch. For me, if I'm eating something with a new sauce or like a spiced dish or something, I'll be tasting it and see if I can try to identify, maybe there's dill in here, maybe there's cardamom, maybe it's like an eggy or pancake batter, or maybe it's very light and fluffy, what did they use to leaven this? There's a lot of interesting stuff that goes on there. But it's like, is that fun for everybody to talk about? How can we make it be an experience that's more broadly appealing? You are the food. Describe yourself and what makes you tasty. I'm just doing weird brainstorm stuff here. Maybe you describe this food as the experience you're trying to evoke. Instead of the specific ingredients you're using. Maybe it's more of a collaborative, cooperative thing. You describe the experience you want to create, and other people suggest ingredients that could support that experience. Eggier pancake batter equals crepes. Yeah, I had a Dutch pannenkoeken for the first time when I was in Vancouver for Shucks. I don't know if it's just this one restaurant or is it this place called The Dutch. I don't know if it's their special invention because they say it is their secret recipe, or whether this is a thing. Because I make a thing that is colloquially called a Dutch pancake, but it's made in a Le Creuset in the oven. And so it puffs up, but it's a very different thing than this pannenkoeken that I had at this Dutch restaurant. It was also very different from the pannenkoeken, which is the Norwegian pancakes that my mother would make that are very similar to crepes, but I think maybe even eggier. Same ingredients, right? It has eggs, it has flour, milk, but it's not quite as thin of a batter, I think, as a crepe. Start with simple foods where it's more condiment than ingredients. Hamburger, hot dog, pizza. Yeah. I think that's... at anyone. I mean, when you're talking about a pizza or hamburger or sandwich, a lot of people know hot dog. Is a hot dog a sandwich? For these kind of things, most people know what they like. I also like the tension between what I like and what you like. So we've been talking about the evolution of these recipes in a positive way, where it's like, oh, now it's like this, but with chocolate in it. Now it has raisins. But what about the arguments that occur when you mess up the family recipe? I don't like it the way you make it. I don't necessarily want to make a role-playing game that's all about arguing, but it's nice to have some drama and tension. So it could be fun to play around with positively appreciated changes and unappreciated changes. Someone might not like nuts or raisins. You're trying to make something healthier with less sugar or butter, or with whole wheat flour, and people don't think it tastes as good. That's a good title for this. Family Recipe Wars. And I'm not sure entirely how I would put that together so it wasn't just negative, argumentative. I got a pitch for it though. How we break the recipes that work their way down our family trees and how we put them back together. Senior Bob says I should try out some traditional Dutch cuisine since that's my heritage. Yeah, you should. That's your assignment, is to look back and figure out what this pannenkoeken is. Dutch pannenkoeken. Oh my gosh, yes. Huh. Interesting. Yeah, it does look very similar to a crepe, but I don't know, just the way they did it was a little bit salty. It was thicker than a crepe, but not quite as thick as a pancake. It wasn't like Swedish pancakes. Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking at the online recipes, and these look much more like crepes. Okay. Yeah, this looks more like it. Yeah, that's your assignment. Pannenkoeken research. Ooh, this one looks more like it. And delicious research too, right? Because this thing was very tasty. Your assignment should you choose to accept it. I don't think I spelled that right. Research pannakoken, or something to that effect. Yeah, I forgot an E in there. Pannakoken. Very delicious, very tasty. I also might be biased because I just love breakfast foods, crepes, pancakes, panna cotta, cinnamon rolls, baked goods. Oh man, I'm starting to get hungry now. Like, oh, now I'm making myself hungry. Which happens when you're working on food games. Cool. So it looks like we have some ideas here. Played a little bit around with the ideas of mechanics and what might go into working the evolution of a family recipe into a role-playing game or storytelling game. Your role. You play as one of the ingredients, listening to the family. So you're the egg that's about to be eaten. It's kind of dark. About whether you should go in the recipe or not. Yeah, so I don't know. I'll have to think about this some more. Some interesting ideas in here. And I think we have a good starting concept with this recipe evolution. But it also seems a little bit like that's the inspiration of the game jam, is the history of our food, how these foods evolve over time, and making them be little foods. I'm happy with the ideas we came up with today, but I want to dig more into this and pick it apart a little bit and see which facet of food and history I want to dig into more. I think that's a good place to end the stream on. Which facet of this is most interesting to dig into? I think this is a good point in the stream to say we come every week with a blank slate, talk about our ideas, ideate things, build ideas out. But a lot of times, if you're trying to make something really unique and creative, it takes a little bit of time for the ideas to settle into your brain, to percolate, step away from your brainstorm list for a little while and see what bubbles up to the surface of your mind and how things evolve. Playing as the ingredients could be kind of unique. Focusing on, I guess, intrusion of outside ingredients. Modifications that come from hardship or lack, I think could be interesting. The stories of our recipes persisting, I think is a good way to put it. Persisting through conflict and loss. Evolving our recipes as a necessity to avoid losing them. So you have to evolve. They have to evolve to survive. Tension and drama. I feel like I'm going kind of negative here, or aggressive with some of these ideas, but that's part of it too, and something I can lean into as I continue to evolve this idea. And again, if you ever want to take any of the inspirations or ideas from here, totally suggest that you do it. You're always going to take the inspirations in a different direction than I do, and it's always really interesting seeing how different people take the same idea and move it in different directions. Tension and drama of modifying family recipes in ways that aren't appreciated by everyone, and how that reflects the evolutions, reflects how our families and communities evolve in different directions that can be difficult to reconcile. Yeah, so it's a feeling of like tension, drama, argument, but you go in a different direction experientially and emotionally, where the just positive, rich, warm descriptions of food, how we share foods, how we appreciate everyone's contributions, making it really supportive and positive. Positive. Make the game feel like sitting down to a delicious meal. For a role-playing game, you can have tension, drama, ups and downs. You do kind of want an arc to the story, and varying levels of intense engagement and disengagement, modulation of emotion throughout the arc of the story. Yeah. Homework for next year's Grand Con, Dutch dining. Michigan was settled by a lot of Dutch immigrants. Ooh. Oh my gosh. Oh, now I want to go to there. I want to eat more Dutch food. I don't think I've eaten a lot of Dutch food. Cool. So we had a lot of really great ideas today. A lot of new directions that we can push this and evolve this. I'm interested to play around with these ideas and push on them, see what happens, where they end up. I think a lot of the time, sometimes you have a game that's fully formed, springs out, beautiful and perfect, doesn't need a lot of tweaking. But sometimes you want to lean into your ideas and hammer on them and see if you push and pull and stretch and rip them apart, if they can end up going in some new and innovative direction that you never would have expected from the original idea. As always, thank you so much for joining me on this stream. I feel like it's super helpful for me coming up with new design ideas. I feel like we always I can never anticipate where this is going to end up, and love the ideas that come out of this, really interesting and innovative, and I look forward to playing around with them and seeing what new designs I can come up with in the future, especially something like this for the Our Little Food Game Jam. It's currently up on itch if you want to check that out. It's the kind of thing, 18 days, right? In 18 days can me or you or anyone come up with an idea for a role-playing game based on food. I think it's a fun challenge with great constraints to it. So look forward to what all of you have to come up with from this challenge or from whatever you're working on. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter at Emma Larkins, or here every Tuesday doing my game design stream. Next week might be tricky because I'm going to be at a design retreat. I'm going to see if I can bring my microphone and at least check in a little bit with y'all and see what you're up to. And yeah. Thanks for joining me. Hope to talk to you again soon, and have fun designing cool games. Catch you later. Bye.